If you're over 60 and noticing subtle memory slips, balance changes, or mental fog, I need you to hear this. Doctors often say it's aging, but growing evidence shows it may be pressure quietly stressing your brain, even when readings look normal. One of the wisest physicians I've ever studied was Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara, a man who practiced medicine well past the age most people are told to slow down. Hinohara never believed aging was about surrender. He believed aging was about fine-tuning. Small adjustments, careful attention, precision. He used to say that decline wasn't inevitable if we respected the body's changing needs. That philosophy matters enormously when we talk about blood pressure after 60, because this is not a time for rough estimates or generic reassurance. This is a time for accuracy. Here's the shock that unsettles many people the first time they truly understand it. Millions of adults over 60 are told their blood pressure is normal, yet their brain and heart are still quietly taking damage. Not dramatic damage, not something you feel right away. It's subtle, slow, and cumulative. The kind of damage that doesn't announce itself with pain, but shows up years later as a stroke that came out of nowhere, or memory loss that no one can quite explain. We assume nothing is wrong because the number was labeled acceptable. Think of blood pressure like water pressure in an aging building. When the pipes are new, they can handle higher pressure without any issue. But as the building ages, those pipes stiffen. Tiny cracks form. If you keep the same pressure year after year, what was once safe slowly becomes destructive. The walls don't collapse overnight. Instead, microscopic damage accumulates until one day something gives. Aging arteries behave the same way. They lose elasticity, and what once flowed smoothly now hits fragile vessel walls with force they can no longer tolerate. This is where modern longevity thinking becomes essential, and this is why I want to briefly bring in the perspective of Dr. Peter Attia. His framing is simple but powerful. The goal of medicine is not just to help you avoid death this year. The goal is to protect decades of brain and heart function, to preserve the ability to think clearly, walk steadily, and live independently for as long as possible. Blood pressure is not just a survival number, it is a long-term organ protection signal. One of the most dangerous misconceptions in aging medicine is the phrase, normal for your age. What that usually means is average, and average is not the same as optimal. If most people your age have higher blood pressure, the average shifts upward. That doesn't make it safe, it simply makes it common. Medicine often confuses what is widespread with what is protective. Your arteries, your brain, and your kidneys do not care what the average is. They only respond to the pressure they endure every single day. This is why conditions like strokes, dementia, and heart failure rarely begin suddenly. They don't start with a dramatic event. They begin quietly, years earlier, with overlooked pressure that was never questioned because it fell within a so-called normal range. By the time symptoms appear, the damage has often been accumulating for a decade or more. We tell ourselves it was unpredictable, when in reality the warning signs were subtle and ignored. In this video, I want to give you something far more valuable than reassurance. I want to give you clarity. You're going to learn why blood pressure standards changed, why aging bodies respond differently to the same numbers, and how to aim for safer, more protective pressure without increasing falls, weakness, or fear. This is not about chasing youth or extreme targets. It's about precision. It's about understanding that after 60, the margin for error narrows, and thoughtful adjustments can make the difference between slow decline and sustained independence. We are not here to accept decline as just aging. We are here to fine-tune. For decades, medicine has relied on a comforting shortcut when dealing with older adults. When blood pressure creeps higher with age, it gets labeled as acceptable, expected, even harmless. The phrase normal for your age enters the conversation, and with it comes a sense of closure, as if the question has been settled. But biology does not recognize reassurance. It only responds to force, pressure, and time. And time is exactly what turns this quiet acceptance into long-term harm. As the body ages, the arteries change in ways that are not immediately obvious. They lose their elasticity. They become stiffer, less forgiving, less able to absorb each heartbeat smoothly. This stiffness causes systolic blood pressure, the top number, to rise. For years, this rise was treated as an unavoidable consequence of aging, something to be tolerated rather than questioned. Yet the arteries supplying the brain and kidneys are among the most delicate in the body. They were never designed to endure higher pressure indefinitely, especially once their flexibility is gone. Imagine increasing water pressure to push flow through old, rigid pipes. At first, everything seems improved. Water reaches the upper floors again. The system appears to function, but inside the walls, stress builds. Microscopic fractures form. The pipes weaken from the inside out. In the human body, higher pressure may briefly maintain circulation, but it also accelerates damage to the inner lining of blood vessels. That lining is where inflammation begins, where plaques form, and where blood flow becomes turbulent instead of smooth. This is how decline often starts without drama. A woman in her 70s hears that a systolic reading of 145 is acceptable. Life continues. Nothing feels urgent. Yet over time, subtle changes appear. Names take longer to recall. Balance feels slightly off on uneven ground. Fatigue arrives sooner than it used to. None of these changes seem connected to blood pressure, and so the connection is rarely made. The number was labeled fine after all. What gets lost in this approach is the difference between age-based averages and organ-based protection. Blood vessels do not age uniformly, and damage does not happen all at once. Each organ has a threshold beyond which pressure becomes destructive rather than supportive. When standards rise simply because populations age, those thresholds are ignored. The brain does not become more resilient with age. If anything, it becomes more vulnerable to pressure-related injury. The most unsettling part is how quietly this unfolds. There is no alarm bell when higher pressure begins to erode tiny vessels deep within the brain. No warning light when kidney filtration units are strained year after year. The damage accumulates invisibly, reinforced by reassurance, until the consequences finally surface. By then, the opportunity for prevention has often passed. This is why the idea of normal for your age deserves scrutiny. It shifts focus away from what truly matters. It replaces protection with acceptance, and in doing so it allows slow injury to masquerade as natural aging. What looks like stability on paper may actually be gradual loss at the cellular level, hidden beneath a label that sounds safe but offers no real defense. For many older adults, the idea of lower blood pressure carries an unspoken fear. There is a belief that reducing pressure inevitably leads to weakness, dizziness, or instability, as if the body cannot tolerate gentler forces anymore. This fear did not come from nowhere. It grew out of earlier medical caution when rapid drops in blood pressure caused real problems. But modern understanding paints a far more nuanced picture, one that separates reckless lowering from controlled protective adjustment. The aging brain is exquisitely sensitive to how blood arrives, not just how much arrives. When pressure is consistently high, blood does not flow calmly through small cerebral vessels. It surges. It pulses. Over time, this turbulence damages the fragile network that supports memory, balance, and executive function. Lower, steadier pressure reduces this mechanical stress. It allows blood to nourish tissue rather than batter it. The heart benefits as well, no longer forced to pump against constant resistance, no longer thickening its muscle in response to strain. A useful way to picture this is to think of pressure as wind along a shoreline. Strong, relentless wind erodes land slowly but relentlessly. Gentle, steady airflow preserves the shape of the coast. In the circulatory system, excessive pressure erodes vessel integrity, while calmer pressure supports longevity. The goal is not weakness. The goal is stability. What has become increasingly clear is that the body adapts when changes happen thoughtfully. When systolic pressure comes down gradually, the nervous system recalibrates. Blood vessels regain some responsiveness. The brain experiences more consistent perfusion rather than sharp peaks and drops. Many people notice changes that feel subtle but meaningful. Thinking becomes clearer. Walking feels steadier. Fatigue no longer arrives as abruptly. These shifts often surprise those who were told that higher numbers were necessary to keep them upright and alert. Modern evidence has challenged the assumption that higher pressure is protective in later life. In fact, prolonged exposure to elevated systolic levels correlates strongly with stroke risk, heart enlargement, and cognitive decline. The risk does not appear suddenly at extreme numbers. It increases steadily as pressure rises above what delicate tissues can tolerate. This is why newer approaches emphasize individualized targets rather than broad age-based allowances. A systolic level under approximately 130 has emerged as a point where many older adults experience meaningful protection, provided the transition is measured and carefully observed. This is not a rigid destination. It is a reference point that reflects organ resilience rather than calendar age. Some bodies tolerate slightly higher levels, others benefit from going lower. What matters is that the target serves the brain and heart, not a statistical average. The most important shift here is conceptual. Lower does not automatically mean fragile. When achieved with patience and respect for the body's adaptation process, lower pressure often supports strength rather than undermines it. The aging body is not as brittle as it is often portrayed. It responds intelligently when given time. And when pressure eases, organs that have been under silent strain for years finally get the relief they were never meant to ask for. Blood pressure often feels like a simple, objective number, something that can be captured in seconds and neatly filed away. A cuff tightens, a machine hums, and a result appears. Yet in older bodies, that number is far more sensitive to context than most people realize. The reading is not just a reflection of cardiovascular health, it is a snapshot influenced by posture, tension, breathing, timing, and the nervous system's momentary state. As the autonomic nervous system ages, it becomes more reactive. Small stresses that would barely register at 40 can cause noticeable spikes at 70. Walking down a hallway, speaking with a clinician, sitting with unsupported feet, or holding the arm slightly too low can all distort the measurement. These effects are not dramatic enough to feel, but they are powerful enough to change the number that ends up guiding decisions. This is why single rushed readings can be misleading. The body needs time to settle. Without that settling, the pressure recorded may reflect alertness rather than baseline function. It is similar to stepping on a scale while wearing shoes and carrying groceries. The number is real, but it is not representative. Over time, repeated reliance on these inflated snapshots can create the illusion of persistent elevation when the underlying pattern is far calmer. In later life, this discrepancy becomes more pronounced. The systems that regulate blood pressure moment to moment are less buffered. They respond quickly to environmental cues, emotional tone, and physical positioning. A clinic environment, unfamiliar and slightly tense, can provoke a temporary rise that disappears once the body returns to its usual rhythm. Without context, that temporary rise can be mistaken for a chronic problem, or conversely, a brief calm moment can hide a pattern of higher pressure elsewhere. This is why patterns matter more than moments. When readings are observed across different times of day and different settings, a clearer picture emerges. Fluctuations that once seemed alarming reveal themselves as situational. Numbers that appeared reassuring in isolation may look different when averaged over time. The body's true baseline is not captured in a single instant. It reveals itself through repetition. Consider how this plays out quietly. An older woman appears borderline in a brief office visit. Concern lingers, yet at home her pressure remains steady and controlled. Without broader context, the office reading dominates the narrative. With context, it becomes one data point among many. The difference between these two interpretations can shape years of unnecessary worry or misplaced reassurance. Understanding blood pressure in later life requires patience and perspective. The number on the screen is not lying, but it is not telling the whole story either. Only when readings are gathered thoughtfully and interpreted as a pattern does the true relationship between pressure and aging physiology become visible. And only then can pressure be understood as a dynamic signal rather than a fixed verdict. One of the deepest anxieties surrounding blood pressure in later life is the fear of becoming unsteady. There is a persistent belief that lower numbers automatically translate into weakness, fatigue, or falls, as if stability depends on maintaining force rather than balance. This fear has shaped decades of cautious thinking, and while it contains a kernel of truth, it often overlooks how the aging body actually adapts when changes unfold at a natural pace. Frailty does not emerge from gentler pressure itself. It emerges from abrupt shifts that the body has no time to accommodate. When blood pressure drops suddenly, the brain can lag behind, momentarily undersupplied as regulatory systems scramble to catch up. This is when lightheadedness appears, but when pressure adjusts gradually, blood vessels learn to respond again. They constrict and relax more effectively. Blood flow becomes coordinated rather than erratic. The result is not weakness, but resilience. Muscle tissue and hydration status quietly play a critical supporting role in this process. Strong muscles act like auxiliary pumps, helping blood return to the heart, especially when standing. Adequate fluid balance maintains circulating volume, preventing sharp dips when posture changes. Together, these factors buffer the system, allowing pressure to ease without destabilizing the body. When they are neglected, even modest changes can feel dramatic. When they are present, the body absorbs those changes smoothly. A helpful way to picture this is to imagine descending a long hill. A sudden plunge is jarring and unsafe. A controlled descent, taken step by step, feels manageable and secure. Blood pressure behaves in much the same way. The danger lies not in the destination, but in the speed of the transition. Aging physiology is capable of remarkable adaptation when given time. This is why many older adults who experience careful adjustments remain steady on their feet and clear in their thinking well into their 80s. The feared trade-off between protection and stability often never materializes. Instead, there is a gradual sense of equilibrium, where standing feels more predictable, walking feels more confident, and energy is no longer drained by constant cardiovascular strain. What becomes clear is that safety and protection are not opposing goals. They are aligned when pressure is approached with respect for the body's pacing mechanisms. The narrative that equates lower pressure with frailty ignores the adaptive intelligence of the aging system. When changes are measured and supported by the body's natural stabilizers, pressure reduction becomes a source of confidence rather than concern, preserving independence rather than threatening it. As Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara often emphasized, aging well is not about accepting decline, but about refining care as the body changes. Blood pressure after 60 should be understood through that lens. A number labeled normal can still place silent strain on the brain, heart, and kidneys if it no longer matches the body's resilience. What matters is protection, not averages. This perspective aligns with Dr. Peter Attia, who reminds us that preserving function is as important as extending life. Clear thinking, steady movement, and independence are supported by pressure that is gentle enough for aging vessels. When blood pressure is treated as a precision signal rather than a reassurance, aging becomes steadier, calmer, and far more secure.